All right, Steve Murphy, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing, man?
Hey Tyler, thanks for having me on the show. I'm doing great, brother. It's an honor to be here on Libertas International Podcast.
Well, the honor is mine, Steve. Like I told you when we did Game of Crimes, like I've obviously admired your work for a long time and your career and everything that you've done, not just in your career at DEA, but even now, like just elevating the voice of Libertas, elevating these survivor voices on your podcast, and just giving such a voice to so many heroes. Like some of these podcasts, I remember one. I was driving home from. I was on a hiking trip from Laramie, Wyoming, driving home to a different part of Wyoming, and I listened to the officer from Boise, Idaho,
Hmm.
and yeah, I remember just driving and crying, just listening, and so I appreciate everything you do.
Thank you, man. It's it only I know this sounds very cliche to say, but it is an honor to bring these type people on here, including yourself, people that are truly making a difference in our world, not just here in the United States, but in other parts of the world as well. And that officer, man, I mean, if you remember, he has a great sense of humor. He talked about how I asked him how tall he was, and he said, "Well, I used to be 6'4", but now I'm only 3'8",
Yeah.
because he'd lost both his legs. And to see that kind of ability to handle such a traumatic event and find humor in it, man, it just gives us all hope. But you know, based on what I learned about you through our interview and just doing some research on you beforehand, you're right up there at the top, brother. What you're doing is making a major difference. You're saving lives. You're rescuing people that might not have any other hope whatsoever if it wasn't for you and Libertas and all the people you work with. So the honor is all mine. I promise you.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Steve. I appreciate those kind words, and I'm excited to get into just a little bit about your story, your family, and yeah, I think people that have listened to you in the past, it may know the name, Steve Murphy, that are logging in, like they'll know about Narcos and the DEA, and we'll touch on that a little bit. But I really want to focus on just your like the vast amount of knowledge that you have, like working with law enforcement, the pitfalls, the advice, the tricks of the trade, like things um that can help us as non-law enforcement people, like at Libertas and like other organizations, work hand in hand with foreign governments, specifically to hopefully enact some kind of justice in this world. And so I'm excited to touch on all that. But I think to start, Steve, why don't you give us a quick rundown for people that may not know your story if they've been living under a rock for the last 40 years. Who is Steve Murphy? Where does he come from? Where did he work? What why is Steve Murphy such an important person?
Well, he's really not. I know the guy, and he's not. There might be days when he thinks he's hot snot, but the truth is he's not. I'm a small town country boy. I grew up in Middle Tennessee, just below Nashville, a little place called Murfreesboro. It's not so little anymore, but it was when I lived there. And as I was going into high school, my family moved to West Virginia to an even smaller town, a little town called Princeton. That's where I went to high school, and then I went to college in West Virginia as well. So I like to kid around that I'm a cross between a redneck and a hillbilly. But the bottom line is, I'm a small town kid. There's absolutely nothing special about me whatsoever. I believe that the good Lord has given me the ability to maintain a good hard work ethic, um, which drives my wife crazy because if I'm home and there's something that needs to be done, especially on the podcast or a speaking business or whatever, I'm taking care of it. It could be 10 o'clock at night. But became a police officer in 1975 in the very small town of Bluefield, West Virginia, about 12 miles from where I went to high school. Only had 35 officers, but it was a real eye opener for a young kid. I was 19. I was 19 by 1 month when I got hired as a police officer. I wasn't even old enough to buy a gun or bullets, but I could put your butt in jail. It's just, it's just so ironic, ironic how everything worked out. But I did that for 6 years, and then switched over and became a railroad police officer for back then was Norfolk and Western. It's now Norfolk Southern Railroad. Did that for almost 6 years, and I love the people I worked with. I think you do in most places, but I didn't really enjoy the work. It was the part that I was assigned to, and this is certainly not a dig on railroad police officers because there's tons of professional railroad cops out there. But I was in more of a glorified security guard position. I mean, it paid really well, and you got a stock plan and all the benefits package and all that that went with it. But it just wasn't what I wanted to do. And I had a very good friend, one of my best friends still, named Pete Ramey. Pete came on as a railroad cop, came to Bluefield, Pete's a big man. He's a good man to have on your side when you need help. And he had been a Virginia State trooper. He worked undercover with DEA on a task force out of Roanoke, Virginia. And he started telling me stories about the DEA, and man, it really piqued my interest. And I thought, that sounds exciting. That sounds like exactly what I wanted to do. And I'd always kind of been intrigued by narcotics cases. So finished up my college degree. I got a 4-year degree in 11 years. So I was moving right along, wasn't I? That's what happens when you get married too young and have children. But got my degree, applied for DEA. It took 2 years to get the job. Finally got hired in June 1987. Went to the police academy. My first assignment after the academy was Miami, Florida in 1987. It was still the Wild West back then. I mean, if you couldn't make a drug case back then, you needed to go find another occupation because it was literally washing up on the beaches and falling out of the sky. Spent 4 years in Miami, then went to Bogota, Colombia for 3 years. That's where we had the Escobar investigation. After that, to Greensboro, North Carolina for 3.5 years. My first promotion came along to first line supervisor, moved down to Atlanta, did that for 3.5 years, moved up to Washington to do my headquarters time. Ended up being in special operations for 5 years, that was pretty cool because you're doing a headquarters assignment, but you're still involved in field investigations. And got my second promotion there as an assistant special agent in charge. Came back to Atlanta for 3.5 years, ran the what we call the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force Strike Force. It's a lot of acronyms in the government. And from there, got promoted up to the senior executive service, which, in government service, that's as high as you can go without getting a presidential appointment. But that required us to move back to Washington. So I worked in DEA's Office of Special Intelligence as the director for a year, and then they detailed me over to the Department of Justice for a few years, and I was the director of the OCDEF Fusion Center up there. Retired in 2013. Was not looking forward to retiring. I was a cop for 38 years. I really don't know how to do a lot of other things, but this company called Netflix called, and we ended up doing the Narcos series. And in the government, you cannot make money on the side, although members of Congress can. I mean, the double standard is just unbelievable. But I had to retire to do that. So that just led into, we're in our 9th year now. And when I say we, that's my old DEA partner, Javier Peña. We're in our 9th year of traveling around the world, telling the true story about Pablo Escobar. I've got the podcast going. We just started our 4th year doing that. There's a project called The Lost Clipper that I'm really excited about that we've been working on for a few years. It involves the disappearance of 15 Americans in 1938 over in Micronesia in the South Pacific. So we've been over there a couple of times looking for that, and we believe it's directly tied to the disappearance of Amelia Earhart in the same area in 1937. And then there's a couple TV projects I'm working on. So I'm staying busy in retirement. I'm loving it. I get to meet fantastic people like you. Good Lord's been good to me. I have no complaints.
Well, good. No, I love your story, and I'd heard all about the Escobar investigation, but I first came across Narcos because my favorite movie of all time is one called Logan. It's the final. Have you heard of Logan with Wolverine and Hugh Jackman, and the
actor that plays the main bad guy in Logan is the actor that played me in Narcos.
Yeah, that's how I found the series is as really,
really?
I loved that movie. I watch it every year. Like, it's still my favorite movie. And that was the first time I'd seen that actor, Boyd Holbrook, is the villain. And so, how the algorithms work, it shows up. Narco shows up on my Netflix. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That's where I first learned about the more in-depth story of what actually happened down there. And obviously I went to your Patreon to find out, what's true and what's not. Obviously I want to know if Puff was real, like what actually happened with Puff the cat, or if the traffic jam where you shot that guy's tire, to find out, what's true and what's not. And so tell us about Narcos. Like, how was that like a life-changing thing? Like, how long did it take to film? Are you guys involved in the whole process? What has the aftermath kind of been like? I'd just love to know. And is Boyd Holbrook a nice guy? I'd like to know that too.
Boyd is fantastic. In fact, he was a guest on Game of Crimes podcast, and I just pulled it up here, episode 128, January 8th of 2024.
That's
and
cool.
we still stay in contact. He's actually getting ready to do a little introduction for me that I can play during some of the podcasts here.
Oh, very
So
cool.
super guy, man. We met his mother at the premiere of season 2 out in Hollywood. She's from Kentucky. Turns out his dad actually was acquainted with my oldest brother-in-law. They were both coal miners. My brother-in-law was a big wig. He was like a superintendent of some of the coal mines there in Kentucky and West Virginia. Just a small world. It really was. But for Netflix, they and really Netflix kind of came along after we signed our contracts. So the executive producer and creator of Narcos is a guy named Eric Newman. And the first time I spoke with Eric, I turned him down, you know, and he about crapped his pants, I know, because he said, listen, if I come to Washington, I'm coming to Washington anyway. Would you come and have dinner with me? And he said, I'm bringing 2 writers, just come and have dinner. So let us give you our spiel in person and then see how you feel. And this is the honest God's truth, Tyler. I'm thinking that's going to be a free dinner in a really good restaurant. And
Yep.
I said, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, we went to a French restaurant. The only thing I ordered scallops because that's the only thing I recognized on the whole menu. I'm a small town country boy here. So, and long story short, they hired Javier and I we sold them the life rights to our story about Pablo Escobar. They brought us on board as paid consultants for the first 2 seasons, which is about the Medellín cartel and the Escobar investigation. Then after that, we didn't get paid anymore, but every season of Narcos has real life people portrayed in it, the DEA agents. So we made a lot of introductions, and those guys would come on board, and then they became the paid consultants. So we've, you know, I guess you paid it forward a little bit would be a nice way to say it, but that's kind of been our involvement with them. That after they filmed season 1, they brought Javier down before they started filming because he took them in Bogota, Medellin, and took them around to places we used to live and where we did operations, the police base, all the kind of background information they wanted to know. Then at the end of filming of season 1, they brought me down, and I brought my wife and 2 daughters with me, and we spent a week down there. And Netflix treated us fantastic. The showrunner was Chris Brancato, who's still a really, really close friend. And our girls got to see, both of our girls are Colombian by birth. To them while we lived down there, and the girls got to see what their life could have been, and not that it would have been terrible, but neither of them they had parents, but the parents had given them up. Okay, so and our oldest daughter, Monica, she was from Bogota, little town outside of Bogota. She was always curious about her birth mom. So my wife had kept all the records and everything. And we had a really, really good Colombian friend that we still stay in touch with. Just spoke to her on the phone last week, as a matter of fact. And she met with us and stayed in the hotel rooms with us. And long story short there, Monica got to meet her birth mother, her foster mother, 3 sisters, a niece, and a nephew from her biological family while we were down there. And she saw the rough life that they were living. And it's not that, we're well to do, but we're certainly not starving here. We have a much better life than, most likely what she would have had in Colombia. So, and our other daughter, Mandy, she has the mind. She's from Medellin. She has the mindset that her mother gave her up, and her mother didn't want anything to do with her, so she doesn't want anything to do with her biological mother. And that's her decision. I'm not going to influence it either way. She's an adult. They're both adults now. But anyway, after they filmed season 1, Javier and I had flown out to Hollywood to start working with the writers to write season 2. And Eric Newman, we were at his office, and he's got a nice movie room with the big plush chairs and the bar and the popcorn and all that stuff. And he's like, hey, would you guys like to see the first episode of season 1 of Narcos? We said, sure. And he said, well, be warned because this hasn't been edited. This is very raw footage. We haven't added any colorization. We haven't edited anything. We haven't added music. There will be parts that'll be cut out and all that. We said, okay. So we go and sit down. 15 minutes into it, we got it walked out. We thought, this is the worst thing. Nobody's going to watch this. I mean, it just looked terrible. Wow. So, we went out, saw Eric, said, hey, man, we're going back to the hotel. He's like, what'd you think? Oh, yeah, that's okay. Okay. Well, but then when the first season came out on television, wow. I mean, not at all what we'd seen in his room. The once they put all the Hollywood magic on it, that's what makes it so spectacular. And Narcos just took off. It was amazing. Our speaking business, which was extremely small back then, and I'm talking maybe 4 events a year. That first year after Narcos, I think we did something like 80 speaking engagements around the world. The next year was a few more than that. So the first 4 years, we averaged 75 shows a year for 4 years, and then COVID hit, and that really knocked business off. But like I say, we're in our 9th year, and we're doing, I don't know, 15, 20 things a year now. It's enough to keep you busy, but not too busy. So that's the whole thing about Narcos. It's a lot of people always ask, was the whole thing true? Absolutely not. Javier and I did our analysis, and we've estimated that about a third of what you see on Narcos is true. The second third, those events are true. They happen, but they are not portrayed correctly. And then that last third, boy, that's just straight up make believe Hollywood. I mean, Puff did not, was not sacrificed he wasn't murdered by the Sicarios. He did die in Colombia, but he was old. He had a heart attack.
Yeah.
We weren't kicking people out of helicopters. Javier was not passing classified information to the communists or to the narcos, all that kind of stuff. So,
and did
we
you didn't
not
beat up the guy in the airport, the cocaine, the American snorting cocaine? You didn't beat that guy up? That's not
even
true?
though I could have. No, that's Hollywood.
Okay.
That's the funny thing about it. And I know they're making an exciting show, and they did a fantastic job. I'm certainly not complaining, but that's not what we do in law enforcement. That's so counter to what we represent. You've heard of that thin blue line. We try to stay on the right side of that thin blue line, not the other side. So, but I get asked that question a lot.
Yeah, I it's one of my favorite shows. I think just they did an amazing job, obviously with the actors portraying. I mean, Boyd and Pedro. Obviously, Pedro is probably one of the top 10 most famous actors in Hollywood right now with his stuff with Star Wars and The Last of Us. And to see him, to go back and to watch that show and the way they portrayed you and Javier's relationship, and how like they incorporated real life stories with make believe, obviously, like Hollywood make believe stuff. Even like how they portrayed Pablo too, where I imagine it's probably a pretty accurate portrayal of as far as like you as a human. You kind of understand, like, he has a wife, he has kids, he gets nervous on things, like you see a human side of him, but there's no doubt that he is the villain of the story. Like the whole country wants him to stop blowing up planes, to stop blowing up cars. And I feel like that's good. I feel like especially like in modern day tourism in Colombia, there's a lot of Americans that go down and kind of celebrate Pablo culture. And I feel like Netflix and your guys' podcast, obviously, when you go to Game of Crimes and you listen to what actually happened, like people know just what an animal this guy was. And when he was killed, Colombia celebrated, and there's nothing about him that should continue to be celebrated today.
Just last week, I don't know if I mentioned this to you last week when we did your interview, but I got a social media message last week telling me what a bad person I was, that Pablo Escobar was a hero, and that we were just jealous is the only reason we killed him. But I used to get a lot of messages where one guy wanted to cut my head off and crap down my throat, and another guy, he sent a message in, I hope your children contract cancer and die a slow, miserable death. And just some horrible things from people. And the truth is, I'm guessing I don't respond to any of those. I'd love to, because I would, it would be counterproductive.
Yeah.
But I'd love to go off on them. But I'm guessing that most of those people sending messages are into us were not even alive when Pablo Escobar was in his reign of power, his reign of terror. Almost every audience we speak to this day, almost every audience, there's a Colombian national in the audience, and they could have immigrated to the United States or another country around the world that we're in. And we always do a Q&A. And then afterwards, if people want to come up and meet us, we'll go meet people and take pictures and sign autographs and stuff like that. But when those Colombians are there, every single one of them comes up to us privately and says, thank you for what you did for my country. I wasn't born back then, but my parents were, and they told me what they went through, or my grandfather was kidnapped, or, they all have stories. And that that's the nicest pat on the back you'll ever get. We were even in Norway one time, and we'd done a show, and afterwards we're back in the green room, and we don't ask for security detail, because everybody that was in the Medellín cartel pretty much is dead now, so we don't really worry too much about retaliation. But they said the security guy came in from the hotel. We were in a hotel ballroom, and he said, "Hey, there's a kid out here. He says he's Colombian, but he's here in Norway. He'd like to come and meet you guys." I said, "Sure, bring him on in." He was the nephew of Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, who was the minister of justice in the Colombian government that Pablo murdered. His uncle is the guy that revealed that mugshot of Pablo after Pablo became a member of Congress. Well, if you'd ever been arrested, you couldn't be a member of Congress, and so Lara Bonilla went and found that mugshot and revealed it in open Congress while Escobar was sitting in there, and so he was expelled from Congress. 2 weeks later, Lara Bonilla was assassinated. So that kid told us, he said, we're curious about his background, and he said when that happened, our family got together because we knew Escobar would kill everybody in our uncle's family. I forget, he says 20, 25, 30 of them packed up and moved to Norway. This kid, he doesn't even speak Spanish. So you hear these kind of stories, and it's a feel good moment for us that, you feel like you did accomplish something. We certainly didn't take out the cocaine market by taking out the Medellín cartel, because you can still buy cocaine anywhere in the world, can't you? But it's just encouraging to hear those stories, and as long as people want to hear our stories, we'll tell them.
Yeah, it's such a great way to put that, and I love that you you talked about the investigation, you talked about taking down Pablo Escobar, and one of my questions I have is, you obviously couldn't do that without the buy-in from the Colombian National Police, and so I'm just like, what was it like working with the Colombian National Police? How did you guys get in good with them? What are like and I asked this question because I have a few friends that are also looking to start nonprofits that work with law enforcement, specifically in Thailand, Nepal, other places around the world, and working with foreign law enforcement is kind of foreign to them. So I mean, how did you guys do it? How did you guys work with the Colombian National Police, and what advice would you give to someone who wants to befriend law enforcement, to support them, not replace them, but to support them in what they're doing to make the world a better place?
Well, you know what? Basically, you're doing in Colombia what Javier and I did down there. We had no legal jurisdiction down there. I mean, we were invited in by the country. We did have diplomatic immunity, which you don't have, but this just kind of a formality more than anything else. And they did let us carry weapons. They gave us weapons permits, things like that. But the first thing you do is you have to go in and show them that you respect them, you recognize their authority and respect that, and that you're not there to try to tell them what to do. You're there to help them any way you can. If you have financial resources, which I know for a nonprofit is a challenge, but if you've got financial resources that will help them to do their job better, just like you talked about where the cops had to go, was it up to Cartagena, I think, and they ask you to fund their airfare and their meals. I mean, that's huge. What you did there is one of the best things you could have ever done. And it's not that you're buying their loyalty, but you're showing them that you're committed to reaching the same operational goals that they are. When you first go in, and I don't know what your first experiences were with them, like when I went in and first met the Colombian National Police, I can be honest with you. When I left Miami and went to Bogota, the only Colombians I'd ever met were the ones that I locked up in South Florida for cocaine issues. And these were major dealers. I mean, my first case where I was the agent in charge, we seized 500 kilos of cocaine. My first undercover, after I'd only been in Miami for a couple of months, we went to the Turks and Caicos Islands and picked up 400 kilos in an undercover capacity from a plane that flew in from Cuba. I mean, small town country boy, you talk about being naive and getting my eyes open.
That's a lot of coke.
But so when I got to Colombia, and as wrong as this is to say this, I just thought every Colombian in that entire country must be a drug dealer. I mean, Pablo is responsible for as much as 80% of the world's cocaine. But what we found when we got there is an extremely proud people. Same things that you already know because you're living in Medellin. They love their country. They love their countrymen. They love what they represent. they will accept you. And as long as you recognize that you're in their world, you're in their culture, don't be the ugly American wherever you go. I'm telling you, because that'll shut doors in your face very quickly. But you go in, you're willing to learn, you want to master their language. You speak much better Spanish than I ever spoke. And I lived there for 3 years. I've kind of lost it now, but and plus when you say hola y'all, that doesn't go over real well. They don't quite understand the y'all part. That's a Southern boy joke. Um, sorry, but you just got to be open and honest. One of the things that that I learned down there is once you become friends, especially in Colombia, if they introduce you to their family or you introduce them to your family, that is huge. I mean, that is a sign of respect that you trust them, that you're opening your door, you're letting them come in your house. I've got photographs where we went to a sergeant's. We're dealing with the generals, but this one sergeant we worked with in Medellin, he invited us to come over to his house for a cookout, and that was a big honor for us. I've got pictures sitting there holding his little girl on my lap, and it was me and Javier, and we had an ATF agent with us. Had a blast there with his family, and these are people that will now be your friends for the rest of your life. So you just really got to go in with an open attitude, an open and honest attitude. Always be respectful, even if they do something wrong and you want to correct it. Just choose your words wisely, because if you embarrass them in front of other people, it's if you need to chastise somebody, it's always best to do that one-on-one, out of earshot of anybody else. If you want to praise somebody, praise them in public, because everybody sees that. And that's what we saw with the Colombians. And one thing that Javier introduced me to is when some of the Colombian police officers would do something special for us that led to a good seizure or a good operation, whatever it might be, we would type out an attaboy letter, and it would come from maybe the head of DEA in Colombia, or maybe if it was a big enough case, maybe even from the ambassador. And we would present that letter to them in front of their colleagues. Not a big ceremony, just like in the wiretap room. There might be 10, 15 people in there, but we'd go in and make a little show of presenting this letter of appreciation. And it was nothing more than a piece of paper where we sat down and typed out the letter and got somebody in an authoritative position to sign it. And that was worth its weight in gold. Yeah, I mean, this showing your appreciation to them for what they're doing, knowing that you and I can't do that ourselves because it's their country. Man, you just get all kinds of mileage out of it.
So many things you said there, they're just so good. Like we have something similar with the letters, but we have like the little patches, the patches that go on the arms after a big arrest, like especially like with if there's like a SWAT team there, and the SWAT team, like, we'll never see again. They aren't the investigators. They're the ones that go in and make sure these guys don't do anything to the investigators. But they all have they're in their tactical shirts, and they all have space on their arms for the patches. And so after these types of arrests, we'll give them a little patch. It costs us, I don't know, 89 cents or $1 maybe to make those in Colombia. And just, you just give it to them like this. If you would have challenged going, just say thanks for your support. And then we did this once with we had 2 arrests back to back. On the first night, the arrest happened in an Airbnb, and we gave them the patches. And then 2 nights later, when the second arrest happened on a different American guy, it was cool to see those same SWAT officers again with the patches on their shoulders. You could just tell if they felt, it was a patch for them. They went and showed their families. They're wearing it now on another arrest, and the little things make such a big difference, because like something like a letter or like a certificate, like a lot of those, they'll put it in their office or tell their families about it, and I think that's what the one thing that I learned too is it's no matter how small an act may be in our view, it's not small in their view. Those small acts mean a big deal for foreign law enforcement, and I really appreciate what you said about the ugly American. When you talk about like ugly American, describe that a little bit. Describe what it would mean to be an ugly American. I ask you, like, not that you've been an ugly American at any point, but if someone is doing a self-reflection after listening to this podcast, maybe things aren't going well with the Mexican law enforcement or the Guatemalan law enforcement, whoever they're trying to work with, to give some self-reflection tips of, well, these are the traits that I would see in an ugly American. Do any of these describe me in my personal reflection? How can I put a better foot forward in the future?
you're going into their world. You didn't grow up there. I didn't grow up there. You go into Colombia, for example, and so think of this. If you were a Colombian national and I came to you, you're a police officer, we're counterparts, and you tell me what's going on. And I said, well, in the United States, this is what we do. Well, we're not in the United States.
Yeah, would
right?
be like, that's great.
I mean, I can remember when I lived in South Florida down in Miami, you had all these folks that moved down, and a lot of agents were from New York City and the Northeast. And they were always saying that, well, New York, this is what we did. Well, pal, you're not in New York anymore. If you're going to do it that way, go on back up there, right?
Yep.
And it was a kind of a northern, southern friendly competitiveness there. The way that we stayed in good graces with the Colombian National Police is we never took the credit away from them. We always made sure they got the credit. And it wasn't that we were giving them anything, they had already earned it. But we publicly, to this day, we tell our audiences, if you forget everything else we tell you in the next 2 or 3 hours while we're up here talking, your one takeaway is who the true heroes were. And it was the Colombian National Police, because they took their country back from that guy, that drug trafficker. I'm trying to keep my language clean here.
You can swear if you want.
I'm trying to be nice, but I'm trying to be a better person, I guess I should say. But just that acknowledgement of who the true heroes are. I mean, did Javier and I go out in dangerous situations almost every day, especially that 18-month period from when he escaped until he was killed? We were living in Medellín for 18 months. We might get to go home on the weekends and we might not. But by continuing to acknowledge that, it doesn't take anything away from us. Yeah, we did some tough stuff. We did things that no other DEA agent at that time was doing. I mean, it was. I'll be honest with you, it was an adrenaline rush. The excitement. I mean, I know a lot of people think I'm stupid when I say this. I'm not. I'm pretty crazy. I'm not real stupid. I'm not stupid, but I'm not real intelligent. But I am a little bit crazy. I love going out on the Huey gunships, and you're taking rounds. And it's scary, but man, you talk about an adrenaline rush. And then you hear the machine guns on the helos that you're in open up on the ground. And I would never want to do it again, but I would not change anything that I got to experience down there. People say, how did you blend in? How did you get along down there? How did you survive everything that you went through down there? Because, you and I haven't met in person, but we've talked quite a bit. I'm 6'2", I'm white, I've got light colored eyes, I'm Irish heritage. I'm about as white as you get. I don't blend into a Hispanic country. I stick out like a sore thumb. When I had hair, it was dark. So, see, I got a haircut since I saw you last week. She took it serious too when I said short, man. It's like,
yeah, it looks good, man.
yeah, right. But the reason that I think we survived, there's a few, but number one is, as a Christian, I believe that God has a plan for every one of us. And his plan for me was not to die in Colombia. I might die while we're sitting here doing a podcast, but it's his plan. So I believe in that. I give him the credit and the glory for that. The second is we were much younger back then, obviously. This is 30 plus years ago. Third is we received a lot of additional training before we went to Colombia, especially in weapons, familiarization and usage and things like that. And the fourth is we worked with a very elite group of Colombian National Police officers, the Dahin unit, same guys you're working with. I saw that in the pictures. I didn't know that until I saw the pictures.
Oh, yeah.
And those guys, I mean, they're the ones that would take us everywhere. We were always with them. They're the guys that when the shit hit the fan, they would stand there and fight and put their lives in front of you to protect you. And we knew they wouldn't run off and leave us. But at the same token, they knew we wouldn't run off and leave them either. We'd stand there beside them and fight with them. So, I think all that probably says that I'm an idiot, which I know, and I'm okay with it. But there's just, that right there, making sure people get credit where credit is due. I'm not saying create make-believe situations. When they deserve the credit, recognize them and honor them.
Yeah, I think another thing that I've seen too is they don't like to be told what to do, especially from like a foreigner, where if a foreigner comes in, it's like, well, you got to do this, you got to do that, or I'm going to look bad at the embassy, or this is how we do it, like in New York or whatever. They like they don't appreciate it. Yeah, I think go ahead.
Well, at my age now, I still don't like somebody telling me what to do.
Yeah, I don't either.
I'm the same way they are. But that's extremely important what you just said there, because you do it one time, even if it's a mistake, you just burn a bridge. You've
Yep.
just blown up that bridge.
Yeah, and it's I mean, it's the whole the geography of it too, like you described, is such a good. And I made this mistake a while back, even with members of my own team, where we have yeah, in Colombia, for example, if a survivor of trafficking reports her trafficker, she doesn't have the right to remain anonymous. And in the States, they do. They can be Jane Doe number 7 until time of trial. In Colombia,
Mm-hmm.
it's not that way. And so they can get threats, they can get amenazas, they can do all these different things. And I told my director of justice, I was like, well, in the States, this is the way it is. And he was like, yeah, that's awesome. Like, that's so good that you guys have that up there. However, it's not that way here. And so how do we work around our system here to make sure that when a survivor is brave enough to report a trafficker, that we do our part to keep her safe? Because we have to work within the system that we have here in Medellin, not the system that you have here there in the States, because it's great, but it's also 100% irrelevant to what we're facing now.
Mm-hmm.
And I had
Yeah,
to, and I, that's with 10 years of experience, I
one
had
of
to
the
get called out.
yeah, yeah, but it's a learning experience, and you learn from your mistakes. You just don't make the same mistake again,
Yep.
right? So, and just one quick story here: when the Western Australian Police paid for Javier and I to come over to Perth, and we spoke at a drug enforcement conference over there, and we met the superintendent from the Western Australia Police, and he said, "Listen," he said, "I want you to go out to the academy this afternoon. I've got my corporals and sergeants from the narcotics bureaus out there for you to go talk to." And we're thinking, okay, well, these are all experienced guys. What is it we're going to tell them that they don't already know? And so we walked into that room, they're all back in their chairs and they got their arms up like this and they're kind of looking down their nose at us like, okay, what are you going to teach us? Yeah, you're the heroes. And what we did, Javier and I said, look, you guys have just as much experience as we do. There's nothing that we can tell you that you already know, that you don't already know. So, we can sit here and answer your questions and we can have some fun this afternoon for the next couple of hours, or we can just sit here and throw darts at each other. And when they saw us open up like that and get rid of that holier than thou attitude, when we left there, we probably had a half dozen guys invite us over to their house for dinner that night.
That's
I
cool.
mean, it's just fantastic. So it's all in your words have meaning. So just select those words very wisely. I'm not.
Well, sorry for the delay, Steve. I know that we're using the free Zoom, so I apologize for that. But there's one thing I wanted to add onto your story, just to reinforce what you were saying when it comes to foreigners working with foreign law enforcement. Is it the Americans do have that ugly American reputation, and so when we go into a place, we're already kind of fighting against that. And so I think it's important that, like what you did in that story, to show that we don't know more than you, we're not better than you, we're on the same level as you, and and put them at ease so that they know you're not that type of American.
Right. And it this is very prevalent in law enforcement. There are type A personalities and huge egos. I'm sure when I was younger, I was guilty of all that. I just honestly, when I came back from Colombia, I didn't feel like I had to prove myself to anybody that, we had gone and worked. That's what you call a case of a lifetime. You're lucky if you ever get to work a case like that, or I don't believe in luck either. So let's just say you're fortunate. Um, so, I went and did my job, but that's what I'm getting paid to do. Why are you climbing? Why do you want to toot your own horn about that? There's an old saying that says if you have to toot your own horn, it's probably not worth tooting.
Yep. Yep.
So, and the other thing is, after talking to you, I can see the passion in you for what you do. There's another old saying. I'm into old sayings here, I guess, because I'm old. But the saying is, you find a job you like, you will never work a day in your life. That's what I felt about law enforcement for 38 years. I never wanted to retire. And just, thank God that he gave me some alternatives that, man, I'm having a blast in retirement.
Good.
Life's good.
Well, I'd love to hear, just like I know we talked about your partners in the Colombian National Police. Is there one that you want to talk about specifically? Like, what about whatever officer you're about to name or don't name, like whatever is up to you. What about this officer, he or she? What made he or she special, and why do you remember them so fondly after all these years?
There's several. Unfortunately, most of the police officers that we worked with back then have passed on. Um, particular was Colonel Hugo Martinez and his son, Lieutenant Hugo Martinez Jr. Now, the colonel was in charge of the search block, which, once Escobar escaped, that was the main body, a 600-man force whose sole job was to find, capture, or kill Pablo Escobar. Excuse me. And Colonel Martinez came in. He was a no-nonsense guy. The guys, there are not a lot of tall Colombian men. Colonel Martinez was probably 6'4". He was taller than me at 6'2", and just had this commanding presence. He looked good in a uniform. He's a good-looking, gentleman. You could tell when you talked to him, he would look at you in the eye. He didn't, he would stop what he was doing. He'd listen to what you had. So he's a very good listener. He's very contemplative. He would think things through, and whatever he told you, that's what it was going to be. And you just respected the guy. He had this command presence that you just really admire. And we always did. And, he was not afraid. He would get on the front lines and get out there and fight with you. It wasn't one of these guys that sat back in the safe zone and said, hey, go out and chase these bad guys and then let me know how it goes at the end of the day. He'd come out with you. And then his son, Lieutenant Hugo Martinez, he's the guy that actually found Pablo Escobar on December 2nd, 1993. He's the guy using the radio directional finding equipment, self-taught. The kid's smart to start with, but he's taught himself how to use this electronic equipment. And he's the one that he's driving down the street holding this antenna out the window, and the meters tell him to look to your left, and he looks up and there's Pablo Escobar on the phone looking out the window. These two guys, they set an example. They set a standard for the Colombian National Police that I believe is hard to beat. Just have the utmost respect for them. There was, corruption wasn't what I thought it was down there, but there was corruption. And even in the DEA unit, there were always two majors. And I'm not going to mention any names here because the guy's dead now. I don't want to embarrass him, but I also hesitate to bring any dirty laundry out on the Colombian National Police. But the truth is, once Escobar was dead, one of the majors who we had fought beside, who had, taken care of us for a year and a half, who we consider one of our closest friends, was working with Los Pepis. Los Pepis was a group of vigilantes, just every bit as bad as Pablo Escobar. And that's, we don't condone vigilantism. And then after he left the police department, after Escobar was dead, I don't know if he quit or retired, but then he went to work for the Cali Cartel, and he ended up getting killed. But that was the only dark stain of all the things that we did. I was there 3 years. Javier was there 6.5 years. That's the only dark stain that I can think of in my whole time in Colombia was that one person. So I think that's pretty honorable. There was these guys, once they realized that you were just there to assist and not command or tell people what to do, once you gained that trust, they would bend over backwards. Even when my wife and we adopted our second daughter, who's from Medellín, in May of 94. And so that's after Pablo was killed in December 93. The ambassador would let my wife and I go to Medellín. We had to go up there twice, but we were not allowed to spend the night because of, we still had a lot of enemies up there. And I had to have a protection detail. Well, I called one of the majors or lieutenant colonels or a colonel. I don't remember who I called, but explained to them what was going on. And they knew that we had already adopted our first daughter, and they loved the fact that we were giving these Colombian babies homes. So, the guy spoke to us. He's like, whatever you need, man. So when we landed in Medellín, my wife and I, we flew up there on Avianca flight jet one time, and got there, and she's got a nice dress on, heels. I've got on a sport coat and slacks, and we get off, and there's all these guys that I'd been living with for the last 18 months. There was a lieutenant in charge of this detail, and it was, it was kind of old home week, and I introduced them to my wife, so that was a big to-do. And then they're like, listen, we got your ride ready. And they pointed over at one of the Huey gunships sitting out there on the tarmac. Connie looked over at that. She said, no, there's no way I'm getting on that thing. I've heard the stories.
Like, surprise, honey.
Yeah. So look, I got you a wedding gift. There's a helicopter with machine guns, got 30 caliber machine guns. So I told the lieutenant, I said, look, we can't do that. We got too many stops to make. We got to go see a judge, a lawyer, adoption, notary, everything you got to do. And he's like, well, I don't know what to do. And I said, call the colonel, and so we got the colonel on the phone. I explained to him what was going on. He said, no problem. He said, no, it's not a problem. Put the lieutenant back on the phone. And so when the lieutenant hung up, he said, if you're here for 3 years, we will be with you every minute of those 3 years. So whatever you need, you got, so here we go, taking off. But it comes from developing that relationship, putting my ego aside, um, certainly suck up that ugly American attitude and just go have, I mean, you can have a blast once you get past those little obstacles.
And there's one thing you mentioned too, I want to touch on too. I had a little story of just, they may not do things perfectly, but calling them out publicly is never going to end well. There's things that you can do to help remedy the situation in the moment, and then maybe do some correction later. We had a case where on one of these arrests where they didn't separate the American trafficker and the victim, and this victim was 16 years old, had some special needs, and so during the investigation, he was looking at her quite a bit. And you can say a lot, without saying a word. And that's what he was doing with his eyes, is he was making her feel intimidated, essentially telling with his gaze that if you say anything, there'll be consequences. And so in ideal world, we would call attention to that. It's like, hey, can we get this a separation? Can we separate these two and do it publicly? Which maybe, hindsight, we maybe should have done in that situation. But what me and my team did is we didn't do that. Instead, we went and stood in the guy's gaze. So instead of looking at her, he's looking at us, and he didn't last much longer looking at us versus her. And once she was out of his gaze, she started to open up more and talk more. And so we remembered the situation in the moment. And then afterwards we supported training for that whole police unit, bought them lunch, coffee, did the whole spiel to help them, give them a certificate at the end. And part of that, it was like action items for when you take home, is that when you have an arrest like this and there's a victim and a perpetrator in the same room, is to separate them, to make it so that there's no intimidation. So there's no one's going to be perfect. Even, law enforcement in the States is not perfect. I'll looking at ways to improve. And I think as human beings in general, we don't like to be called out publicly. We're much more effective when we're called out privately versus publicly. But you talk about, the Escobar investigation and these people and the need of having a security detail. And I think now, history, as things like podcasts and books have become more accessible, I think most people at least recognizes Pablo Escobar is probably one of the top 30, at least, most evil people that's ever walked the earth. And for you guys, as you guys were in the middle of that fight with the Colombian police, facing this person with unlimited resources, with sicarios all over the city, all over the country, who's blowing up airplanes, who's blowing up cars. I have a friend who's Colombian. She has a shelter for exploited children, and she still won't walk on sidewalks. She has to walk right in the middle of the road just because of the trauma that she has when she was a teen girl, 20-year-old girl of car bombs going off. And so with you guys, like, what was it like to face that kind of evil, and how did you stick with it? I think a lot of people, like when you see the Avianca plane, for example, getting blown up, you might be like, you know what? I really liked my job in Miami. I think Virginia's great this time of year. Let's pack up and go. Like, how did you guys stay in the thick of it, facing what would end up being probably one of the most evil people to ever walk this earth?
Well, my first reaction to that question is, you got to remember that DEA did not hire me because I was real smart. Okay. But, again, it goes back to the God-given work ethic that I have. I think I learned that from my dad, because he was a minister and he held at least one, if not more, jobs on the side to support our family. There are times when you do want to walk away, just to be real honest about it. There was those few months before Pablo was found and killed. We ran into this dry spell. We were getting zero tips. We'd run out of leads. We're sitting around the base, sometimes all day long and not going out doing anything, just bored out of our minds. My wife is back in Bogota by herself. She's working in the embassy. And Javier and I, we sat down and have a conversation that's like, you know what, just let the guy surrender and go back to that country club prison he built. And what that was, that's a poor, pitiful me party. That's us feeling sorry for ourselves, and that's when you're starting to put yourself in front of what the mission is, what your objectives are. You're putting yourself above others, and that is completely wrong. And so what snapped us out of that is there was an operation that we did not go on, and a couple of our colleagues in Medellín were killed. Let me tell you, you want something to snap you back to reality? Go to a funeral in Colombia. We went to a funeral there. You know, the Colombian National Police have their own funeral home in Bogota. It's got like 6 viewing rooms in there. You can have 6 bodies in there at the same time. Well, one of our operations, 8 police officers died. Javier and I went to that. It's, I mean, you see the families there. It's heartbreaking. They do not embalm bodies in Colombia like we do here in the United States. They drain the fluids, and once you smell a body decomposing, it's a smell you will never forget. But that's the way it was, you know, and it just, so anyway, the whole point of that saying that was it snapped us back to reality of, you know, quit feeling sorry for yourself and get your butt back to work here. Do what you're supposed to do. And we did. And then, you know what? The leads started coming in again. So it's easy to become complacent. You know, when I first got down there, especially when Escobar escaped, we were told that there was a $300,000 bounty on each of us, Javier and I both. And there were actually intercepted calls because we're you know, Colombian National Police are doing wiretaps, and we're listening to some of the tapes. And we heard Escobar make reference to the 2 gringos at the base, you know, and that was us. And then another phone call, we heard him actually mention the names Peña and Murphy. I got to tell you, Tyler, that's a little disconcerting. It's not like that old TV show Cheers where you want everybody to know your name. This isn't a guy, you know, this is not a guy you want to know your name. But in typical, you know, law enforcement bravado, you know, we're back in the, and when we get back to the embassy, we're bragging to the guys that, yeah, Pablo knows who I am. Well, that was really stupid.
That's awesome.
But, you know, that might be a defense mechanism also, because it is disconcerting to hear somebody, you know, we attributed 10 to 15,000 murders to Pablo Escobar. One of his last remaining sicarios was a guy, John Jairo Vasquez Velasquez. They called him Popeye. And he passed away a couple of years ago from cancer. But he had his own TV show. He wrote a book. He was all over social media. And he's in a TV show called Facing Escobar that we're in. And he says, you know, those gringo guys, they say that Pablo is responsible for up to 15,000 murders. He said the number is more like 50,000 murders. So for me to get any messages from anybody saying Pablo Escobar is a good person or was a good person, you're extremely naive, you're extremely stupid, or you're uneducated. I don't know what, you're an idiot to believe that. Go do your research.
So that is it's just interesting. Like the stuff that you're saying has a lot of correlation to what a lot of our survivors are facing currently as they're, you know, standing up to evil, and, you know, sometimes evil punches back. And so my next question is like, when the fight is going well, like when you're winning, when there's arrests happening, when in your case, when there's seizures happening, when you got people giving you tips, in the fight against evil, how do you enjoy yourself? Like, how do you enjoy the moment? How do you appreciate what you're doing? Like, what would you guys do to celebrate the good times? How do you enjoy those good moments in this fight against evil?
You know, as simple as this sounds. So in Colombia, you may have seen this. A police base is similar to what our military bases in the United States are like. You know, you got your inner perimeters, your outer perimeters, you got concrete pillboxes with machine guns set up in them and things like that. You got the serpentine driveways coming down. And in Medellin, our base, between the inner perimeter and outer perimeter, there was actually a neighborhood. And, you know, those people had all been vetted, investigated by the Colombian National Police. And they were always on the lookout for sicarios trying to infiltrate the neighborhood and get inside to us. But also there were little shops. So there might be an ice cream shop. And there's one shop that you could go get a really good hamburger and a good cold beer. So we go there and have, you know, if we had a good day, Javier and I would take all the guys from the DEA, you know, our unit together, and we go up and have burgers and beers for the evening. And of course, that led to some aguardiente, and that led to us falling down on the sidewalk, and that led to a hangover the next day. But as simple as that was, or this was a biggie. So eventually, our ambassador, who's a retired lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy, loved a guy. Can do. Morse Busby was his name. He's a can do man. He brought in the U.S. Navy SEAL Team 6, and he brought in the U.S. Army's Delta Force. And they lived with us up in the base for 18 months. Well, not quite 18 months, more like 16 months. But, I mean, you talk about studs. those are the studs of the world. I have the utmost, Javier does too. We have the utmost respect for them. And we tell our audiences, if I'm ever kidnapped, that's who I want to come and get me because I've seen what these guys are capable of. But because they're military, they were restricted to base. Well, we were too, but we knew we can't do our job if we stay here on, in the background. So we violated policy, rules, and procedures every day. We never violated the law, but that's why we were going on operations. So just I started thinking about those guys, and I forgot what your question was, the original question here.
No, it was. I think you're telling it. It's the advice in the good moments. I think celebrating
Oh yeah.
the wins against evil. I know I have my thing where it's like when I have just a really good win, I will order something off Uber Eats. There's something about I love having my food delivered to me, and just keep working or watching TV or watching the game or whatever, not having to leave or cook or clean up, having my. But it's a little expensive. Uber Eats, maybe
Mm-hmm.
20-25 bucks a delivery or something, and so that's my thing of like, and I really do believe that like in this fight, because this fight's long, sometimes like I think we talked about on the Game of Crimes podcast where you mentioned it earlier in this podcast about the cocaine trade. Sometimes when you cut off one head, two heads take its
Mm-hmm.
place. And so in the good moments where the good guys do win, I do feel like it's something worthy of celebrating.
It is. It's the simple things, and what I was going to tell you about those guys is getting close to the end of that manhunt of that 18-month period. One of the Delta guys found out there was a Domino's pizza in Medellin. And so maybe every 10 days or so, and they would call us over and, hey, we're going to order Domino's. You want some? You want in on this? Well, of course I do. you know, and I gotta say, it's not the same as US Domino's, but it's Domino's pizza, it was great. And the whole point of saying that is just those little simple things. Going out and having a burger and a beer, having a slice of Domino's pizza when you're in a foreign country, just have an Uber bring your food to you so you don't have to go
Oh,
get it.
it's
It's
amazing.
it's those little things, and it's these little personal celebrations. When we would go home, my wife and we adopted our first daughter in October of '93, so that was a couple months before Pablo was killed. And then I have to go back to Medellin and work and live. So when the weekends I got to come home to be with her and our new baby, oh man, we broke out here a few weeks ago for the July 4th weekend. Both daughters came with their families, and we broke out the old home movies and had the girls when they were just little toddlers, and um, you know, just
That's
brings
cool.
back good memories. But it's just the little simple things like that that were real celebrations.
So I guess the kind of the opposite of that question of when you feel like you are losing the fight, when you feel like the evil is so thick, it's permeating so many different things of your life, of your work, when you're attending a police officer's funeral or when he escapes a prison or when the plane goes down and when you just feel like the not only are you losing, but you're getting your ass kicked. How do you bounce back from that? Like how do you keep the motivation to be like, I gotta stay in this fight. I don't want to give up. How do you, I guess, when things aren't going well and you really are just getting your ass handed to you by evil, how do you stick in the fight and how do you, I guess, continue to fight back even though it feels like you're losing?
Well, it's easy to get into that feeling sorry for yourself mode, the poor pitiful me thing. And what I do is once I get in that mood, it takes me a little while to realize I'm in that mood, and then I pray about it. I pray, God, get me back on track here. Get these pathetic thoughts out of my mind and show me what I need to do here. And I continue that to this day. This podcast, learning how to edit and all the stuff that goes along with it. Now that I'm doing it solo, is extremely challenging, for an old guy like me. And I've never been real tech savvy. So I still pray for guidance and motivation. Um, and it just seems that it happens. Like I told you, we were feeling sorry for ourselves. And this is a bad example, but, two police officers were killed that were friends of ours. And that snapped you right out of it. It's, you just got to realize, why did you get in this to start with? What was your objective? Have you completed your objective? In your case, are children still being kidnapped and terrorized and humiliated and all the bad things that go along with human trafficking. Has it stopped? No, it hasn't stopped. The reality is it's probably never going to stop in our lifetimes. But that, for me, that's just motivation. You know, the cocaine situation in the world is no better now than it was 30 years ago. It might even be worse. But when I talk to police officers, especially people some are old friends and then some are coming on the podcast, but they start talking about cases, I still get excited. You know, I think it's the good Lord just reminding me, hey, stupid, I put you in that position. You remember how much you liked it? Well, that was me. You know, so I'm not trying to turn anybody off with religion. You make up your own mind what you think is true and not. I'm telling you what I think is true, and I think it's God's will that we do what we do. What you're doing, I would never have the patience to do. I would love the excitement of going and arresting the bad guys and building the case against them. But I mean, you saw how I reacted when you told me about that 19-month little old girl. I mean, just, oh, even when I was editing that and doing the outro on your podcast, which I don't know when this is coming out, but yours comes out on July 22nd, on 22nd, 23rd, I started tearing up all over again. So I just mentally couldn't do what you do down there. I don't have that. I have the sympathy and the desire to help those children, but I think I'd be literally a basket case if I was doing that. I don't know that I could ever get used to that.
Well, I appreciate those kind words. It's interesting because even like reading through like my personal journals, I can kind of see cases where you just feel like you're losing. You know, you're like, well, I've rescued enough already, or I've done this for 10 years. Maybe that's been enough. And when things get hard, yeah, it's like those thoughts of like, chopping wood in Wyoming for the rest of my life is not a bad way to live. It's a nice little life. And there's always two
No,
things that
it's
like
not. No,
there's
it's not.
there's always two things that come back to me. There's one, it's let's say like you make that decision. You're like, okay, I'm done. I'm checking out. Can you look at yourself in the mirror and be okay with what's looking back? I don't think so. I don't think that like as someone like you that's dedicated your life to fighting evil, someone like those of us at Libertas, I don't know if we could look at ourselves in the mirror and be like, I gave up and I'm thankful I did. I just don't know. I don't think that can happen. And then it's like you talk about is it still happening? I think of like this sweet little kid that came into our program about a month ago, and she has nobody. She lives with her boyfriend's family, but her and her boyfriend are broken up, but they're allowing her to live there. She literally has nobody. She has nowhere to go. She has no parents, has no family, and her ex-boyfriend is allowing her to live essentially on her couch.
Mhm.
And so because she's so vulnerable, there are people that exploit her and tricked her into coming to a finca where for a party of 20 guys, she became the entertainment. Little 14-year-old girl. And so for her, like she came into our program and now she gets to study lashes and nails. She gets to do homework like a normal kid. She gets to wear a uniform like a normal kid. Like her situation is not perfect still, but at least she has a place she can call home where she knows that these people are supporting her because she's welcome here.
Mhm.
And for me, it's like, well, if Libertas wasn't there, like where would she go? I don't know. And so I don't want to think about it because here she's welcome, here she's supported, here she's loved, she's a great kid. And so I think all that advice you gave is really good. I mean, I'm just thinking out loud here on just how to, in the good times, celebrating the good times, making sure those good times are celebrated. You create those memories and you enjoy this short time that we're on this earth. And then at the same time, in the bad times, like how to not let those bad times, because they will come, they'll come again, 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 how to not let them take that joy that you talked about, that joy that you have in doing what God's called you to do.
Well, I don't know if you've listened. For your listeners there, I sent you advanced copies of your interview, and I don't know if you've heard them yet. Excuse me, but after the interviews are over, I call it the debrief for the outro, and that's where I have a few thoughts after the interview. And one of the things I talk about when I'm talking about you is here's a young man who, when he saw a need, he didn't say somebody should go do something about that. What Tyler said is Let me go do something about that. And you did. You've been doing it for 10 years. If it's not you, who's going to take up the slack? Who's going to pick up where you leave off? You know, listening to you tell your story, you're still motivated. You're still excited about what you're doing. You're proud of the adults that these young girls are turning into. You're being invited to places that I've never been invited to. I've never been invited to the United Nations. I've never been invited to Vienna, Austria.
I'm sure it's
You
coming.
know, I mean, you're doing things that, and you just turned 34, right?
33. I turned 34 in November.
Okay, so you're 33.
Yeah.
You're doing things and have done things that people my age dream about doing. You know, I've said it over and over. You'll probably get sick of hearing this after you hear the podcast interview in its entirety, but I'm in awe of what you do because I challenged my listeners in that little debrief. Think about when you were 23 years old. What were you doing? You know, would you have had the guts to stand up, you know, give up everything that you have and start a nonprofit with almost zero funding and then move to a foreign country and live and work to help other people? Would you do that? Because I know at 23, I was a cop. I'd been a cop for 4 years by then. I wasn't mature enough to do something like that. I'm not sure I'm mature enough to do it now. I'm 67. But it's, there's this little corny saying. And so in government service, you take an oath. You know, you take an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States and all of its citizens and blah, blah, blah. Well, just because when you retire, this is my little saying that I've kind of captured is just because I retired, it doesn't mean that my oath ever expired. So I'm not out on the streets now. I'm not the guy running towards the fire. I'm not the guy running towards the gunshots. I'm probably the one trying to beat everybody else to run in the other direction. I did that for 38 years. I miss it. But just because I'm retired doesn't mean I can't try and do things to help other people. And so that's why I do the podcast. That's why Javier and I do the speaking events, because we don't want anybody glorifying Pablo Escobar or any of his colleagues in the Medellín cartel or drug trafficking in general. That's why we're trying to do the Lost Clipper project. He and I are the lead investigators in that project, trying to find these Americans who just disappeared off the face of the earth in 1938. That's why I do some of the TV shows that we do. We've done a ton of documentaries. There's actually a series out now called on CBS and Paramount Plus called The Real CSI Miami, and I did a couple interviews on that. I haven't seen them yet. They might suck. I don't know. I haven't seen them. So, but the whole point is, I feel like I'm still trying to do things to help other people. And if you go into law enforcement and you have an objective, any other objective than wanting to help others, get the hell out. You don't belong in law enforcement. You're a public servant. Even though you're not an official government public servant, you're serving the public. Now, a lot of people look at that title of public servant as a derogatory term. I don't. I look at it as a heroic term because you and I chose to dedicate our lives to helping other people. So whenever you're feeling, you know, it's human nature to get down on yourself, that you know, you get a little depressed about this. You get to come home on vacation, and then sometimes it's hard to go back, isn't it?
Yeah, they call the rest and reconsider versus rest and recover, the R&R.
Yeah, yeah. Whenever you're feeling like that, if you call me, I'll do my best to talk to you and build you back up. I might fuss at you a little bit, but I just want you to understand that what you're doing is so critical in the lives of so many people. You know, and when the good Lord tells you you've done enough, you're going to know it. I used to ask people, how do you know when it's time to retire? And every retiree I talk to says, you'll know. And I'm like, well, that helped me about this much.
Yeah.
But you know what? When my time came, I knew it was time. So, you know, just God bless you for what you're doing, brother. You and all the folks that work in Libertas and all the other organizations that are out there to combat human trafficking. There's a group in Nashville, in Franklin, Tennessee, right outside Nashville, there called Aerial Recovery. I've had a couple of those folks on the show. There's just so many fantastic people like you guys that are out there trying to serve the public. You know, no greater calling, I'm telling you.
I appreciate those kind words, Murph. I think a lot of, like, for me, is finding, inspiration from someone that's done this and that has, like, lived in the city that we work in, that's fought evil, that's worked with foreign law enforcement. So, like, just like having you as a mentor, as a friend, as someone on the podcast that can share these insights that after we're done I can go back and listen to and take notes, versus like being an interviewee. Now I can go back and be like the learner and take notes and apply what I'm learning. And I just so appreciate it. And I'd love this. We have about 6 minutes left before this Zoom runs out. I'd love if there's anything I didn't touch on that you want to say, like where can people find you? I know you've got Game of Crimes that we've talked about a few different times. We'll put that in the show notes. We'll add a link to Manhunters, which has been a book that I listened to a couple different times. It's helped me a lot in my life. Why don't you tell us if I missed anything that you'd like to add in the last 6 minutes?
I appreciate that, brother. It's like you said, our website is gameofcrimespodcast.com. I say we, but my co-host, he had to drop out a few months ago because of other responsibilities, but his paycheck doubled. So I'm certainly not begrudging for that.
Don't feel bad for him.
Yeah. Javier and our business over there is DEA Narcos, NARCOS.com. That's our speaking business. We've got a little merchandise business, and I do it on the podcast as well. There's a calendar on there that tells you where we're going to be around the world. We're mostly doing private corporate events now, or conferences, so it's kind of hard for the public to get into those. You'll see some pictures on there and some write-ups about how great we think we are and stuff like that. So the book Manhunters, you can get it off Amazon, or you can go on our website. And from our website, you can get autographed and personalized copies. What else? The big thing on the podcast is I've just started posting on the videos, on YouTube. And it's just go to YouTube and type in Game of Crimes podcast, and it'll pull it right up for you. And yours will actually be, I think, the third episode that I've posted on YouTube. So I just started this a couple weeks ago. So if you do go there, just click on subscribe. It doesn't cost you a penny. I think when I took it over, we had between 600 and 700 subscribers, and I'm trying to build that up as high as we can. And the purpose is, just to be perfectly honest, it brings in advertising, which is revenue. And what that will allow me to do is hire a professional to edit the show. So you want to have all these ums and ahs and glitches that when I edit it, that's what comes out. But it also frees me up to do other things. We have a Patreon channel. You can go to patreon.com/Game of Crimes. That's a subscriber channel, so you have to pay for it monthly. But I've got more episodes on there than I do on the regular podcast. And it's anything from, I do a monthly Q&A where you can ask me anything, to you can't make this shit up, which is stupid criminal stories. Just posted last night what we call the case of the month. And like in this event, I think I had 3 different cases I talked about over an hour. Just current crime things that are going on. What's the other stuff? I take a crime movie once a month and watch it, and just kind of diagnose that and rate it as to I rate it on accuracy, believability, and just it's kind of fun. And then there's random surprises that come along. I'm getting ready to do one on the legalization of marijuana, and I have a lot of our subscribers emailing me, when are you going to put that out? So that's going to be coming out real soon. So anyway, that's how you find me. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, just go to Stephen Murphy, Stephen. I go by Steve, but my wife and my mom call me Stephen. I'm usually in trouble when that happens. But there I've got quite a rather large following. And Facebook. So when I retired from DEA, you could not find me on the internet.
Now,
well, it's marketing.
Yep. And it's free
I'm
marketing.
Still learning
Facebook,
about business.
LinkedIn. Yeah, it's if you're not in those social media games, you are not marketing effectively. It's a pain and it's time consuming, but it's marketing.
I just can't quite bring myself to do TikTok, and I don't know that I ever will.
Yeah, but if you can stay away, you should, because once you get going, it's pretty addicting.
Yeah. Well, whether you believe the Chinese own it or not, I happen to believe they do. So yeah, I've got a friend who's a cybersecurity expert, most intelligent person I've ever met in my life, and he told me stay away. So that's good enough for me.
Well, now I got to delete it because it came from one of the smart people. I got to delete it now.
Well, it wasn't me.
Oh, man.
No, it's just, I can't thank you enough, Tyler. It's the friendship that we've developed. We haven't even met in person yet, but I mean, I feel like we're going to be lifelong friends here. I will do anything I can to support you and Libertas, your efforts. You introduced me to your mom, and that was a big deal. I appreciate that. If you're ever in Orlando, that's where I live. You got a place to stay. Even if you're just passing through, I'll meet you at the airport and we'll have coffee and sit around and chit chat. But I will support you, brother, as long as you're running this thing. You're doing God's work, whether other people believe that or not. You're doing things that nobody else has the balls to do. So I'll support you 100%. Very proud of you and all your colleagues.
Thanks, Steve. No, I appreciate you. I appreciate your mentorship and your friendship. I'm just so thankful that I got to meet you and our paths finally crossed. And I thank you for coming on the podcast. And if there's anything I can ever do for you, know that the feeling is mutual. And I can't wait to meet you in person. I know it's a matter of when versus if. So let's plan on it.
Things will happen. I don't believe in coincidence and I don't believe in luck. So when it's time, it'll be time.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Steve. I sure appreciate your time. And I'll send you this. I can stop recording now before I